So, I'd like to start off by thanking Stefan for laying out in a very nice way the genetics of what might be called vasopathies of neuroprogenitors. Genetic lesions within a linear flow of information, starting with receptor kinases at the top of the cell, through RAS, BRAF, neck, and so forth, down to regulate gene expression. I'm going to focus on the most common genetic lesion in these sporadic pediatric low-grade astrocytomas, the BRAF mutations. Two common types, shown here schematically, starting with the genetically normal wild-type BRAF. Stefan did a nice job of discussing the history and the anatomy of the truncation fusion versions of BRAF, where you eliminate this N-terminal autoinhibitory domain. He actually didn't mention the other kind of mutation, a single amino acid change valine to a glutamate substitution in the catalytic domain of BRAF. It's very, very common in adult malignant melanoma and important for what follows in a few minutes. This truncation fusion is rare in melanoma, but as Stefan mentioned, it practically defines the pilocytic astrocytomas through grade 1. Probably 85% of these tumors have the truncation fusion type mutation. But the melanoma type point mutations, V600E, do pop up sporadically as we move to the higher grades. Low-grade gliomas, not otherwise specified. Ganglion gliomas, almost 60% of these tumors have a point mutation. Two types of mutations, as you see, are generally mutually exclusive, which is what you would expect. Overall mutation rate of BRAF in pediatric low-grade astrocytoma about 75%, and this, if you need faster than I can say it, pretty much defines that pie chart. So against that backdrop, here's what I'd like to do in the next few minutes. Talk to you about signal transduction. I'm going to give you a short course in BRAF signaling and talk to you about the limitations of the first generation of RAF inhibitors for pediatric low-grade astrocytoma. And then move on to the work we've done in our group, drugging BRAF. Talk quickly about the mouse models we're using, new technology for imaging blood-brain barrier. Talk to you about the state-of-the-art highlights of RAF inhibitors. And if time allows, it may not give you one little alternative approach to treating these tumors, synthetic lethal. So, when the first news of these genetic lesions that Stefan talked about came out, there was a kind of euphoria. And the reason for that is that small molecule inhibitors of BRAF had been well along in the drug pipeline for treating a much more common adult cancer, malignant melanoma. Two drugs shown here, already FDA approved for treating malignant melanoma. Dramatic, albeit transient clinical responses in patients with this very metastatic type tumor. But quickly it became apparent there's some bad news here. The current generation of drugs, which are type 1 kinase inhibitors, we'll see more about that in a minute, only work on the truncation, the point mutations, the valine to glutamine substitutions. They really have no impact on the truncation fusions. Here's a slide, a long-term loan to me from Neil Rosen at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which kind of explains that. BRAF, like most protein kinases, functions in a dimeric state, have activation of RAS. RAS recruits RAF subunits to the cell surface. They bump into each other, and there's an allosteric activation. Subunit number 1 allosterically activates number 2. So the problem is at low to moderate concentrations, type 1 inhibitors block catalytic activity of subunits, but they do not prevent dimerization. And in fact, inhibitor binding actually induces allosteric activation of subunit number 2, as shown here. One thing you might ask is why don't both these guys have drug blocked? And there's a key concept here called negative cooperativity. So binding of one molecule of ATP or type 1 inhibitor in one subject raises the KD for binding the second molecule. So you only get both of these subunits loaded up with drug at very high concentrations, and at that point you're seeing off-target effects. The reason that the type 1 kinase inhibitor work on the truncation fusion is that the truncation fusion mutation of RAF alone is capable of functioning as a monomer, so these drugs completely shut that off. The second problem is that patients being treated with these type 1 kinase inhibitors, Plexicon drug and others, develop skin rashes, and in some cases, small molecule squamous cell carcinomas. And that's the reason for that is summarized schematically here, adapted from another big broad to that. In a cell transformed with truncation fusion mutation of BRAF, this mutated BRAF is speaking very loudly to MEK, which is talking loudly to ERK, and ERK feedback inhibits signal transduction through receptor and tyrosine kinases. So when you come in with a potent inhibitor of BRAF, you shut off that feedback inhibition, and now growth factors loitering around the surface of the tumor cell here are free to start signaling again. And you very quickly wind up with adaptation to the RAF inhibitors. You get a new steady state in which there's some constitutive signaling allowed. Another problem, the blood-brain barrier. Not an issue with malignant melanoma, but an issue with our kids. Here there's kind of a paradox. Some low-grade gliomas, in particular the juvenile pilocytic astrocytomas, do feature local breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, so drugs in principle can get at the tumor. But as I already mentioned, the mutation you see here is typically the truncation fusion, so the drug can get at it, but the drugs don't work. Perversely, if you go to the higher grade astrocytomas in kids, you typically do have V600E mutations where we've got drugs that work, but here you don't have that local breakdown of the blood-brain barrier, so the drug can't get at it. It's just perverse. So, final problem has been the lack of human models that be suitable for drug screening. The kids' tumors just cannot be passed in cell-culture or immunosuppressed mice. So here is what we've been doing about all of this in my laboratory. To start with mouse models. Now, the first thing we need to talk about in mouse models is that pediatric low-grade astrocytomas are not astrocytomas. They are stem cell omas. If you do immunohistochemistry on these tumors for the neurogenic transcription factor olin-2, you see that they're chock full of olin-2. And this transcription factor serves as sort of airport traffic control in the fate choice decisions of neuroprogenitors during development. It is actually impossible for a cell to express olin-2 and be an astrocyte. Olin-2 suppresses formation of astrocytes. So these are stem cell omas. And you're building a mouse model, you really want to start with stem cells. The other thing you need to consider in building your model is the state of the tumor suppressor gene p53, the so-called guardian of the genome. Unlike most adult solid tumors where p53 is physically disrupted, p53 is largely intact in pediatric low-grade astrocytomas. They're all wild-type for p53. The pilocytic astrocytomas are typically likewise wild-type for the p53 attenuator P16 E4A ARF. Well, if you go to the higher grade tumors where you find P600E, you do find occasional deletions in P16 E4A P14 ARF. So what we've done to build some mouse models for these various diseases is to start with wild type or E4A or P53 conditional null mice. And we made 3 flavors of mouse models, stem cell driven models. Start with stem cells, introduce your favorite oncogene, either the V600E or the truncation fusion mutation of BRAF. And to model the juvenile pilocytic astrocytomas, we start with just wild type progenitor cells from the mouse, put in the truncation fusion KIA mutation. These things are barely tumorigenic, I'll show you in a minute. Our model for the higher grade, low-grade astrocytomas, diffuse fibrillaries, low-grade astrocytoma not otherwise specified, is we start with the P4A P19 null mouse, put in the V600E, and these things are sort of tumorigenic, as we'll see in a minute. And we have one more model which we call pathway relevant. In testing for drugs, it's good to get your bad news fast. So we made this one model which is completely ablated for P53. It's P53 null. And here you can put in either the V600E or the truncation fusion. And these things are very, very aggressive. You kill the mice in 3 weeks. Now, as I say, it's not genetically relevant. The kids' tumors are all wild type P53. But as you'll see in a minute, it's pathway relevant. Here is the Kaplan-Meier survival curves of our low-grade pilocytic astrocytoma from grade 1. They make tumors, but it takes almost a year. They're really unworkable for drug screening. Our model for diffuse fibrillaries, the higher grade, is workable. You start to kill the mice after a month or so. And then here's this pathway relevant model. It's explosive. The V600E version of this kills mice all within 3 weeks. Truncation fusion takes a little bit longer, but it's still workable. But I say it's not genetically relevant. All these cells are p53 null, not the case with tumors. It's pathway relevant. If you put in wild-type BRAF, it does not make tumors. p53 ablation is not tumorigenic in and of itself. It requires one of these versions of the mutated BRAF, so it's pathway relevant, useful for drugs. The blood-brain barrier is an issue, and here's how we're dealing with that. It's a semi-new technology called MALDI mass spec imaging. But what you do here is you take a mouse and gavage the mouse with your favorite drug, or it could be a rat or a dog, or it could be a human. You're doing awake surgery on a brain tumor patient, have the patient take a pill. And then you wait for a time of your choosing, sack the mouse, take the brain, or start the surgery on the patient, take a little bit of tumor tissue, make a cryostatic frozen section, and coat with the MALDI mass spec, and you rasterize this coated tissue with a laser beam on the XY axis. And what you do is resolve the mass spec data coming through. You image your favorite drug, a targeted therapeutic, together with some other compound that you've administered to the mouse, such as an impermeable to dye. Nowadays we just use heme. So what you do is you look at the ability of your drug or the impermeable marker, heme, to escape the lumen of the capillary here. And if the two agents which you falsely colored segregate, it's Christmas here, the drug is getting out of the lumen of the blood-brain barrier. If they overlap, it's Halloween, it's not getting into the blood-brain barrier. And the person doing this work is Natalie Agar in our local gastrocytoma program. She directs the surgical imaging laboratories at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Here, a quick demo here. This is what it actually looks like. You see these little puffs, looks like meteorites hitting the surface of the moon. And each time there's a puff here with a laser, you get a little spectrometer here. Those of you close to the screen can see a little dot moving just to the left. And now it's going to pop up and then it'll start back in the other direction, pop down. That's what it actually looks like. This is slowed down by a factor of 5. Here you can take these images that come out of mass spec and hit these two things here if you would. You can actually resolve these things in 3 dimensions and rotate them around. We have the movies here. Apparently we can't. It's cute, trust me. So here is some of the kinds of things you can resolve with this sort of data, practical demonstrations. Here's a RAF drug that actually does not get into the tumor or get through the blood-brain barrier. It's a perfectly good RAF inhibitor if you implant. This is the pathway relevant model subcutaneously. You can see that these mice get the tumors very, very quickly. Here, you put it subcutaneously. And sub-Q, the drug works. But if you put the same tumor in the brain, the drug is doing nothing. This drug cannot get through the blood-brain barrier. So here is what this drug looks like by MALDI mass spec imaging. We start with 2 brains that got a tumor, this one and this one. This is a control negative. And what you can see is that the tumors are pretty bloody here, as a lot of brain tumors are. Now you look at the drug and you say, hey, this is pretty good. Talk about targeted therapeutics. This drug is going straight to the tumor. Looks very encouraging, but I've already shown you this drug does not work on the tumor. It works sub-Q, but it does not work on the tumor. And the issue here is this is low resolution. This is imaging at 100 microns. If you dial that laser down to 25 microns, which is the diameter of a blood vessel, you can see it explained. Here are the pixels for drug, here's the pixels for heme, and you can see that these pixels basically overlap. What's going on in this tumor is that it's secreting a lot of VEGF. And what VEGF does is it takes what should be a rushing mountain of venules and arterioles, and you get this bloated, swollen Mississippi River tangle of blood vessel, low blood flow. This is showing that this is a real tumor. So the drug is just aggregating in this sluggish vascular environment, but not really getting through the lumen of the capillaries. Here's what it looks like if you have a drug that's actually working. This is BGM-120, a drug which actually does get through the lumen of the blood capillaries, as you can see here. You can do this right, you can get time course. Here's 1 hour, 2 after, 4 hours after giving the mouse your drug. You can see how long it takes for the drug to work. You don't need radioisotopes, special conjugates. There's something else, I'm not going to go into this here, but you can actually buy this technology detect sort of regional differences in stringency of the blood-brain barrier. Here we took a mouse, gave it this BKM120 section of the brain front to rear, and what you can see is in certain regions of the brain, typically in the midsection, getting close to the ventricles, it's more permeable to drug than places elsewhere. So, armed with these tools, let's screen some drugs. So we'll start with BRAF inhibitors on this pathway-relevant model cell line. Start with the type 1 kinase inhibitors. Two drugs already FDA approved for treating malignant melanoma. What you can see is that these type 1 inhibitors, both of them, are quite potent on pathway-relevant cells transformed by the V600E mutation. And these little circles here show you a very nice therapeutic window. The blue line here is normal neural progenitors just growing in EGF, FGF. The drug really doesn't touch it. It only works on the cells that have been transformed by V600E and are dependent on that. But the problem with these drugs is that they do not touch the truncation fusion version of our pathway-relevant model, shown here in the purple line. That's cell growth. This is using cell counts. Here's the biochemistry that correlates with that. You can see here the V600E transformed cells, Western blotting for phospho-ERK, get a nice dose response to the drug, whereas the truncation fusion, you're getting no response to the drug whatsoever. In fact, this sort of paradoxical activation that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. We've been focusing recently on the second class of protein kinase inhibitors, the type 2 protein kinase inhibitors. These are non-ATP competitive inhibitors, and unlike the type 1s, which bind the active state of your favorite protein kinase, type 2 inhibitors bind the inactive state of the kinase. Here's two of them we've been working with, one from Millennium, one from AstraZeneca. These look much more encouraging. The type 2 inhibitors block both the truncation fusion and the point mutation versions of BRAF. This is the Millennium drug, this is the AstraZeneca drug, here's the biochemistry. You're getting good inhibition of V600E and the truncation fusion at identical doses. Another plus is that these type 2 BRAF inhibitors do not show the rebound effect. So here is the Plexicon drug, type 1 kinase inhibitor. And this is a time course, 2, 4, 8, 24, 48 hours after treating the drug. And you can see phospho-ERK coming back over time. That's this rebound effect you see. You don't get any work, no action at all here on KIA. You've seen that before. But if you look at the type 2 inhibitor, very potent on truncation fusion and V600E, and when you knock it down, it stays down, but you don't get this rebound effect that's giving the patients the rashes and the subcutaneous tumors with type 1 inhibitors. There is no free lunch, unfortunately. I showed you a while back with the type 1 inhibitors. There's a very wide therapeutic window because the type 1 inhibitors can only work on the V600E monomers. They don't work on the dimers whatsoever. Type 2 inhibitors, it looks like there's a little bit of a therapeutic window. To tell the truth, I can't figure out why. There really shouldn't be one. But the therapeutic window, if this is real, is much narrower. Okay. Drug penetrance. Here, I caution you all, this is sort of hot off the press. Got some emails on the flight coming in from Singapore. The Western blots of the line. This is quite preliminary. But we decided to focus on the Millennium drug because conventional pharmacology, monitoring the ratios of this drug in rats, looking at the amount of drug in plasma versus brain, says this one looks like kind of a winner. You want this number to be big. Here's the Plexicon drug. It's basically not getting into normal brain whatsoever. GSK3 drug a little bit, but this Millennium drug, this looks like kind of a winner, so that's a pretty decent number there. And this is what's hot off the press from Natalie. These are not publication-grade images yet. They're encouraging. This is the tumor H&E stain. Actually, with Natalie's equipment, she can image the tumor itself by mass spec. There's a kind of a tumor-specific liver image that's pretty well. And then this is the drug here, and this is heme. kind of ignore this big puddle here. There's a lot of blood, I think, in the tumor, and this puddle of drug here overlaps with the blood. But what I'm encouraged about, if those of you close to this, you can see, is in here in regions where there's really no tumor, you can see green is not overlapping with any particular red. And in intracranial tumors, the drug actually looks like it's hitting the target and working. So this is the V600E mutation of the drug, showing a dose-dependent response to the millennium drug by relative bioluminescence. And recall that former drug I showed you, BRAF 265, with no response at all. And we're actually getting a survival benefit here with the millennium drug. That's pretty impressive because these cells are completely p53 negative. Like I said, these are very aggressive tumors. But there is a bit of a survival benefit. Likewise, this is the truncation fusion, showing at least a bioluminescence response. In this particular experiment, we actually didn't get a survival response yet. I think it's because these tumors grow more slowly. We repeat this. But call it early exit polls, but encouraging. So the last thing where I want to leave you with is the following. I think we've made some progress here. Stefan, David Jones, Goodman, others did just a sensational job, I think almost 7 years now, finding a very frequent and potentially relevant target for these tumors. The initial euphoria was quickly dampened by the fact that the drugs developed specifically for adult melanoma aren't working well for the kids for reasons the structure of the mutation itself that you see in the blood-brain barrier. But we made some progress. And where we stand is we've got small molecule BRAF antagonists that might be useful for these. There are also MEK inhibitors currently in clinical trial. All well and good, but where I wanted to leave you with is one little trick, and I know how the trick works, but I'm not going to have time to show it to you here. The question is, are these really targeted therapeutics? The MEK inhibitor, there's no mutations in MEK actually. MEK is needed all throughout the body. Blood cell needed, the immune system, etc. The truncation fusion mutations respond to the type 2 inhibitors. There might be a small therapeutic window here, but we're not shown. These drugs are not as targeted as we'd like them to be, for example. So here's my favorite approach to play with: synthetic lethal. Could you make the oncogene itself kill the cells? You can do that by playing off the stemness of the cell. So here are these neuroprogenitor cells. Wild-type mouse neuroprogenitor cells, positive for OLIG2. And they will tolerate transformation by either the truncation fusion or the V600E. The other thing is that they will tolerate loss of OLIG2. Here we've genetically ablated OLIG2. That's okay, they don't need OLIG2 to grow, at least in culture. But they will not tolerate the combination of the oncogene and OLIG2 loss. The reason for that is OLIG2 is actually opposing p53 function in these cells. And remember, these cells are all wild type for p53, and you can rescue with OLIG2. Put OLIG2 in a retrovirus, you rescue that. So this shows that this killing death is really due to the loss of OLIG2 itself. Now, the trick is it's very difficult to drug a transcription factor. We've got some thoughts about how to do that, but it's not ready for prime time at all. Nope. This is a summary of what we've gone through today. The most important slide is here. These are members of the group Pediatric Low-Grade Astrocytoma Program at Dana-Farber. A strong collaboration with Neil Rosen and his associates at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Sponsored by the usual cluster of NIH grants, but special credit to the Kids Brain Tumor Cure Foundation, the 3 founding families shown here, for providing the seed money and then the ongoing money to carry out a lot of this work on drug development, which does not lend itself to typical hypothesis-driven NIH grants.